I don't really believe in coincidences. I just don't. I mean, there are things that are coincidental, like having the same birthday as somebody that you know, or bumping into a friend in a random, unexpected place. I think those things are random chance events. There was no way you were really going to be able to predict that. I guess by definition, that makes something a coincidence. Those things are funny, and I'll allow those, but for the most part, I don't believe in coincidences. I think that everything happens for a reason. I guess the word for this would be determinism. I believe that everything happens for a reason, but more importantly than that, I believe that more often than not, these reasons are worth investigating. I think most reasons are worth exploring. I think that reasons are interesting. I think that the past is interesting, and I love using the past to inform the future. Why am I opening this video that way? What am I talking about? Well, I want to talk about Jayden Daniels. I want to talk about the best rookie quarterback season we have ever seen in the history of the NFL. And I want to talk about how this season, it wasn't random, it wasn't a coincidence, but it also wasn't expected. I don't think this is something that really anybody predicted, at least not to this full extent. I think some people expected Jayden Daniels to be good. Not everybody did, but definitely not everybody thought that he would have the greatest rookie quarterback season of all time. And that fascinates me because these things don't happen on accident. That's my point. That's my opening here. These things all happen for a reason. Hindsight is a gift. I mean, we've heard that term before, using the gift of hindsight. That's a thing people say normally kind of facetiously. Is that the right word? I don't know. Editor Anthony here. It's not. I'm pretty sure I was just trying to say condescending. People kind of disapprove of hindsight. Hindsight is kind of stigmatized because if you're only ever looking back to the past, you might walk straight into something and bump into it. You have to be able to apply hindsight forward. Otherwise, what good is it if you're only studying the past? Well, as a determinist, as a deterministic thinker, I love hindsight. I really do. But again, I think it's only valuable if you apply it. So in this conversation that I want to have about Jayden Daniels, in this exploration of the past, in this unboxing, this gift unwrapping of hindsight, I want to take a look at Jayden Daniels, the player, the lessons that we can learn from him, and then figure out how to apply those lessons going forward, how to make something out of the Jayden Daniels conversation, this Jayden Daniels season, the Jayden Daniels experience, all of it. So without further ado, let's converse. So for this JD conversation, I want to lay it out in three parts. First and foremost, I want to talk about Jayden Daniels, the archetype. Archetype, I think is how you say it. Then I want to talk about Jayden Daniels, the player. And then I want to talk about JD, the lesson. I say this, I've said this before and I'll say it again. With every quarterback, really every player, but specifically quarterback, that enters the NFL, you start with a question and you're ultimately handed a lesson. Some sort of question around, well, a player with this frame, a player with this much experience, a player with this play style, how is he going to work out in the NFL given these specific circumstances, playing on this specific team, working with these specific coaches? We never know what's going to happen, but we learn what happens, and that learning is a lesson. We're not done with Jayden Daniels. If Jayden Daniels is a course, we just got done with JD 101, right? Season 1, that's what we wrapped up. But there still are lessons in that. There are some JD 101 takeaways, and those are the things that I'm going to end the video with. But before we get to that, let's walk through Daniels. Let's walk through everything about Jayden Daniels. And like I said, I want to start with JD, the archetype. Now, I think some people might already be rubbed the wrong way that I'm starting out with an archetype. I'm not starting out with Jayden Daniels specifically. And I understand that frustration. It's kind of reductionist. It's kind of diminutive. Is that a word? I think it's a word. It's kind of profile-y, throwing Jayden Daniels into this group with a bunch of other quarterbacks that are allegedly like him. I can understand the frustration. I've got a lot of Commanders fans friends. Some of them did not approve of this when I was doing this around the draft or after the draft. Here's why I want to do it though. I used to go to school for journalism. That's what I majored in. That was one of my majors. And one thing they really frown upon in journalism, and rightfully so, is editorializing, opinionating things, using words that kind of sensationalize or make something more emotional, make it feel like there is a person behind the writing. A lot of times in journalism, at least in the real world when you're talking about things like politics, you want to try to be as objective as possible. You don't want to editorialize. You want to be a neutral conveyor of information. And I think that makes perfect sense. But sports is different. I do not like when people try to hide behind the illusion of objectivity in sports. I don't think there is a such thing as objectivity in sports. There's at least 32 different conflicting ideologies when you look at all of the different fan bases in the NFL, and every different fan base, every different ideology, they look at the game slightly differently. As I talk about Jayden Daniels, as I talk about quarterback archetypes, as I go through this entire conversation, I want to make it very clear that it's me who's talking. It's not somebody else. I am not some all-knowing person. I am not some objective viewer of football. I view football in a very specific way that not everybody else does. And it's for that reason that I want to start with archetypes, because by starting with these, by telling you how I profile quarterbacks, the groups I put them in, how I look at the position, you understand my perspective. You don't have to agree with it, but you understand how I view the game, and you understand why I think the way I do about Jayden Daniels. Like I said, this is a conversation, so you don't have to agree. You can put that in the comments, whatever, but let's do it. Let's talk about JD, the archetype, at least how I view him, at least through my lens, because I think it's going to be fun. I hope I'll have something interesting and informative to say to you, and it allows me to cycle into talking about JD, the player, with the gift of context as well, while showing how he compares to other quarterbacks that have come before him. I mean, this is what scouting is. It's profiling players, it's filing them down and putting them in specific drawers, all of that. Oh, and that's one other thing. I think that putting JD in an archetype first and foremost, it'll show you how JD, the player, actually breaks the mold that was set for guys like him before him. That's a lot of prefacing, that's a lot of warning you in advance, and for all I know, maybe you were cool with this from the beginning, so maybe I just chewed up 3 or 4 minutes for you, but let's get into it. Let's talk about JD, the archetype. To do that, I want to start off by talking about some traits, because we're talking about my QB ideology, right? What sort of things I look for in quarterbacks, what sort of traits can compare Jayden Daniels to other quarterbacks. Specifically for this part, I want to talk about Jayden Daniels in college, because like I said, nobody really knew to project this for Daniels. Nobody really expected this from Daniels. And we were working with college film for Jayden Daniels. That's where all of these guys start. Trait number 1, sack avoidance. That's where I start with quarterbacks. I start in the pocket. Before they even throw the football, the number 1 thing I'm looking at is sacks. How often do you take them? Sack avoidance is supremely important. From the days of Bill Walsh telling his quarterbacks, hold the football, hold the football, hold the football. If you don't like what you see, simply throw it away. You don't want to get tackled in the backfield. That is not good for your offense. It's not good for your team. In recent years, we know that these things are really harmful for, expected points, that metric, or like win probability, that sort of thing. It's mattered from the days of Walsh in Montana to the days of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen in recent years. I mean, just this season, Josh Allen took 14 sacks across the entirety of the regular season. MVP candidate right there. You know the last dude to take 14 sacks or fewer in a season consistently? Peyton Manning. Here's where I want to start. Sacks are really harmful. How harmful, you ask? Well, a couple of years ago, Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus, he did a study where he basically quantified a sack as minus 1.8 expected points of value. Every single play, there is a projected amount of points that you're going to get. That's just kind of the baseline of how effective are offenses in general at moving the football and how valuable was one given play to your drive. It's kind of like war in baseball almost, like efficiency above expectation, that sort of thing. For example, a 20-yard gain on 3rd and 25, that's not as valuable to your team as a 20-yard gain on 1st and 10. That's what EPA is for. It's meant to relatively quantify how efficiently you're moving the football and when, situationally. So on average, a sack taken, as of like 6 years ago when we first started looking at this stuff, it was about minus 1.8 points. More recently, we've had other people liken it to the inverse, the reciprocal of a 20-yard gain. That's a lot, right? A 20-yard gain, that's considered an explosive play. We don't really have a term for the opposite of explosive plays yet, at least not for offenses, but a sack would be that. A sack's an explosive play for the defense. Not good. A different study showed that drives are 18.4% more likely to end in a punt if a quarterback takes a sack, and 20% more likely to not end in points. These are really harmful. We don't want to take them. I know that interceptions are the main stat that we use to talk about quarterbacks who are playing poorly. I think that a quarterback who takes a lot of sacks but doesn't throw a lot of picks, compared to a quarterback who throws a lot of picks but doesn't take a lot of sacks, it's pretty clear to say which one we'd want. We'd probably want the sack guy. Not always the case necessarily. And a lot of it's situational, but the point I'm really trying to get at here is someone like Josh Allen last year, 2023. Not that many sacks taken, a lot of picks thrown, but a lot of those picks were on, say, 3rd down. A 3rd down interception is far less harmful than an early down sack, but if you just compare them in the stat sheet, you'd probably think that the pick was more harmful. Arm punt versus sabotaging your drive on the 1st or 2nd play. Big difference. Sacks matter. I do not like sacks, but the thing about looking at sacks and using them to evaluate quarterbacks is we know that a lot of times offensive lines can lead to sacks. Maybe you have a really bad protection scheme. Maybe your coach is setting you up for failure. Maybe you're always playing from behind. Maybe you just get sacked a lot because of game script. You can't just look at sacks alone. That leads me to trait number 2, the bigger trait here, pressure response. If I'm a defensive coordinator and I'm preparing to face off against any quarterback in football, doesn't really matter who, question number 1 for me, how often do they take sacks? Should I be preparing to pressure them a lot? Should I be trying to bait them with this sort of thing? Should I be playing into this? Is this something that matters? Question number 2, though, what is their general pressure response? If they are not getting sacked, what else do they do and how frequently? Do they take off and scramble? Do they try to escape the pressure and extend a play in the pocket or outside of the pocket but behind the line of scrimmage? Do they just chuck the ball up downfield after evading pressure, or do they stand in there and rip the football? All of this stuff matters. You need to know what's going to happen if you try to get pressure, which is often by blitzing. You know what I mean. And fortunately, we have a lot of great metrics for pressure response. The most important one being, well, pressure to sack rate. How often when a quarterback is pressured do they take sacks versus the other options? This one kind of evens the playing field for guys who are under pressure a lot versus not too often. When you are pressured, what do you do? The other thing that's really interesting about pressure to sack rate is it generally doesn't change from college to the NFL very much because it's kind of a psychological tell. No matter how good the competition is, no matter how good my receiving core is, no matter how good my protection is, all of that, when there is somebody charging down in front of you, bearing down on your face, your brain is going to panic. This is a highly stressful situation, and you're probably not going to change your response too much based on external things because this is an internal thing almost. It's just you and that guy right in front of you, right? So pressure to sack rate, an extremely valuable trait to look at in quarterbacks, an extremely valuable tendency to read into. On top of that, you can look at things like pressured scramble rate. How often do quarterbacks, 1, escape, and then 2, get downfield? You can look at pressured throw rate. How often do quarterbacks actually stand in there and throw the football when they're pressured? All of these things matter. And every quarterback can kind of play with these traits in a different way. The good quarterbacks, first and foremost, before anything else, though, have great pressure to sack rates. And the interesting thing about these quarterbacks and their great pressure to sack rates is that play style can be very different, and you can still have a really good one. So in 2023, 2024, I mean, any year, really, Patrick Mahomes generally has one of the best pressure to sack rates we have ever seen, point blank, period. That guy does not go down. He's always turning into Mr. Fantastic back there, finding a way to out-flexible the defenders, finding ways to get around them. That's his thing. That's Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen, he's kind of just too big, too strong. He will stiff arm the guy barreling down upon him. He will backpedal 30 yards, throw off his back foot, and it's right where it needs to be. Tua, the year that the Dolphins were the most high-flying offense in football for at least the first half of the season, he and Patrick Mahomes had the 2 best pressure to sack rates in football. But what's really funny is Patrick Mahomes had one of the longest time to throws in football, and Tua had one of the smallest. So Tua was beating the pressure by getting the ball out really fast, and Patrick Mahomes, he was just ducking, dodging, and weaving back there, and then making a play. All quarterbacks can do this differently. Brock Purdy was also kind of like Tua that year. He would just get the ball out really quick. This year, though, early on in the season, he was trying to do his best Mahomes impression. He was extending plays forever. His time to throw was one of the highest. It's a complete spectrum, but at the very least, if a quarterback sucks at this, it's a big red flag. You've got guys like Sam Howell. You've got guys like Will Levis. This year you have like Caleb Williams. All of these quarterbacks who struggle early in their careers, more often than not, regardless of the weapons, regardless of the protection, they make things harder on themselves than things need to be by simply accepting that sack, which, like I said in part 1 of this trait that I was setting up, it's just harmful. It's just bad. You want to throw the ball away. You don't want to take sacks. Anything but a sack. That's big trait number 1, split up into 2 parts. Taking sacks and pressure response. Trait number 2, now we can finally move down the field out of the pocket, is how often a quarterback throws over the intermediate middle of the field. That probably sounds pretty weird, right? That sounds maybe niche. I don't know. It's very specific. Trust me, it matters, and the best way to explain how much it matters is to cite from one of my favorite NFL analysts, Nate Tice. Nate put out this great piece sometime last year where he likened these throws to the three-pointer in basketball. Every player in basketball these days has to shoot threes relatively well, right? Better than at least 20, 30 years ago. Everybody shoots better than back then. And that is because being able to shoot the three is imperative to modern spacing in the NBA. If you can't shoot a three, you will not be guarded from three. That extra defender can then go somewhere else, go do something else, and that makes things harder on the rest of an offense. Very similarly, in football, The intermediate middle of the field is where the most defenders are. You've got linebackers, you've got safeties who can crash down, everybody. If your quarterback cannot layer throws over that area of the field, they are the hardest throws to make in many ways because, like I said, there's so many people. If your quarterback cannot do that, cannot hit those throws, cannot comfortably, confidently nail those tight windows, the rest of your offense is going to be kind of screwed. Now, not entirely screwed. There are offenses that primarily play outside of the numbers. I think of guys like Russell Wilson. I think of Kyler Murray, generally the shorter quarterbacks who can't see over the middle, and I'm not even kidding when I say that. Those guys prefer to play a bit more loose. They hold on to the football for longer. They'll take deep shots down the sideline. They'll take the short stuff underneath. But over the intermediate middle, that's not their favorite. And the thing about these quarterbacks is that oftentimes they can get away with it for a regular season, but in the playoffs, they might come up short because defensive coordinators just know what sort of tendencies to prepare for a tiny bit more. A really great example of this actually comes from Nate Tice's article about these three-pointers, and it had to do with Jalen Hurts, another quarterback who's kind of middle field avoidant, and his playoff loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year in the playoffs. As we all know, the Philadelphia Eagles kind of struggled with play calling last season when they went 1-6 down the stretch. Clearly, they're a lot better now, so clearly these weren't just Jalen Hurts' problems, but I can tell you with confidence that in their playoff game against the Bucs, where they got stomped out, now they were stomped out on defense too, it wasn't just the offense that struggled, but stomped out and a bad day on offense. When this happened, a lot of it was because of Jalen Hurts and his tendencies. On the season last year, when pressured, Jalen Hurts primarily scrambled to his right and tried to throw down the field along the sidelines. The Bucs knew this. They knew they didn't really have to worry about too much else, and their game plan against the Eagles in the playoffs was pressure Hurts, guard the sidelines, don't worry about anything else. And it worked. It worked really well. That's an example of what I'm talking about here, about how this tendency can kill you, but you can still be a good quarterback. And like I said, Russ and Kyler, two other great examples. But it's really fascinating, and it's something that every offensive architect wants to be cognizant of. In the Eagles' case, they go, okay, we don't really have a quarterback that likes to throw over the middle much. Maybe we just keep this offensive line good, keep our downfield receivers talented, pay them, and get a guy like Saquon Barkley. That'll probably work, right? Meanwhile, some of the other best offensive minds in football, say the Dolphins or the 49ers with Mike McDaniel and Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay with the Rams, these guys love to work the middle of the field. They love the intermediate middle. Their quarterbacks, their heat maps, all of it, intermediate middle. That's what they do. And as we know, the Shanahan scheme is one of the best schemes in football. The Shanahan tree is one of the most effective trees in football, and it's because of how they space the field. It's funny, their quarterbacks, guys like Brock and Tua, I would almost liken them to spot-up shooters in the NBA. They can nail these throws, they don't do much else. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts, Kyler, Russ, these guys are maybe like slashers. They do everything else, but they don't really do the threes. Both can work, like I said, but it's a spectrum. It's absolutely a spectrum. My final trait that I want to talk about here before we get to the next part is deep balls, deep ball accuracy. We are moving all the way down the field now. We started in the pocket, then the middle, now deep. Deep ball accuracy, the reason I want to talk about it is because it's not a trait the same way that the other traits I listed are quarterback traits. Deep ball accuracy can be kind of relative to your receiving room, relative to your receiving talent. I'm not even sure I'm using the word relative correctly right now, but what I mean is it's often a wide receiver stat. When you think of the best deep ball throwers in football, they're often not the quarterbacks with the strongest arms. Joe Burrow, he does not have one of the strongest arms in football, but he's a phenomenal deep ball thrower. Jalen Hurts, I mean, y'all remember the Hail Mary from the Super Bowl last year? He's a phenomenal deep ball thrower. A lot of it, though, is because these quarterbacks, one, have good enough arms and great touch. Touch is also really important. Shout out Russell Wilson. But two, they trust their receivers. A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf, when Russ was over in Seattle. I can tell you I'd be a lot more confident throwing a deep ball myself if those were my guys. Deep ball accuracy is a wide receiver stat in many ways because receivers are the ones who are responsible for adjusting to a pass when it's in the air. Do they need to accelerate? Do they need to slow down? Do they need to plan to track it over their shoulder? Or, like Terry McLaurin, do they just need to jump up and chest catch this thing higher than the DB? Receivers can do all sorts of things. It's the quarterback's job to just get the ball in the vicinity. That's the final trait that I want to outline because now I want to talk about quarterbacks who all have similar tendencies in relation to these traits. This is where Jayden Daniels comes in. All right, So where does Jayden Daniels fit into all of this? Let's talk about JD, how he applies to archetypes, and his general traits, the good and the bad. We'll start with the good. First and foremost, Jayden Daniels had amazing stats in college, right? He won the Heisman. You can't really dismiss that too much, especially not against his level of competition. He was playing the best defenses in college football. Don't take that lightly. He was clearly a good player, but he had some very unique tendencies that don't necessarily translate always to the NFL. Jayden Daniels did some very specific things very often and very well. In college that works, but the NFL is a do-it-again league, and it's a lot harder to do things again without having counterpunches, additional answers, unless you are a truly special talent. And the whole point of draft season is figuring out if one player or another is truly that special of a talent. So all season in college, in his Heisman year, Jayden Daniels is doing what he does again and again and again, but he's doing it with the best receivers in college. Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, already two of the better receivers in the NFL. Could he do it again in the pros? This is where traits come in, the traits that I just listed, independent of stats, independent of what Daniels did well in college. What is Daniels going to do in the NFL when context changes? What's his pressure response going to look like when his protection is worse? What is his intermediate middle of the field tendency going to look like when defensive coordinators know how to plan for a quarterback who doesn't throw there? What is his deep ball accuracy going to look like when he's not throwing to two of the best receivers in the league, in the sport? These were all questions because we knew that Jayden Daniels did some things really well, and we knew that Jayden Daniels did not do some other things that you generally look for in quarterback prospects. The question: did he not do these things because he couldn't, or did he not do these things because he chose not to do? Now let's talk about the traits. So pressure to sack rate, scramble rate. These are two really big things in college. Pressure response, like I said. Well, Jayden Daniels kind of profiled alarmingly in these metrics. His sack percentage in his final year when pressured. This was charted by Ben Solak, formerly of The Ringer, in his Ringer NFL Draft Guide. JD had the highest sack rate when under pressure of any quarterback in the draft class, 23.3%. For NFL context, that's kind of a Will Levis number. Not really a great quarterback to profile to, right? Will Levis, Justin Fields, these are some guys who also had bad pressure to sack rates. I'm going to show a tweet right now. I'm hoping it's like over my shoulder. I don't know. Take a look at all of these quarterbacks who had similar pressure to sack rates in college, and take a look at Jayden Daniels. How many of them panned out? Right? You see what I'm talking about? Jayden Daniels' overall profile to pressure was a 23.3% sack rate, an 18.3% scramble rate, which was incredibly high, an 18.3% escape rate, so he got out of the pressure and then tried to make another throw, a 36.7% stand and deliver rate, so just being comfortable with the pressure bearing down, and a 3.3% throwaway rate. For comparison, Caleb Williams, a guy who at the time was the no question first overall pick in the draft. Very pro-ready, does all of the things that you look for at the NFL level. 43.4% of the time, Williams stood and delivered. That's about 7% higher than Jayden Daniels. His sack percentage was about 7% lower than Jayden Daniels, 16.2%. His scramble rate was more in line with what you look for in pro quarterbacks, 5.1%. His escape percentage was 21.2%. He'd get out of there a lot, and his throwaway percentage, 13.1. Bill Walsh would be proud. Drake May, one other quarterback for context with these metrics, he had a 55% stand and deliver rate, a 14% sack rate, so the best of any of these guys, a 15% escape rate, 15.6, a 9.2% scramble rate, so he will take off, but not too often, and a 6.4% throwaway rate. So Jayden Daniels definitely profiled uniquely, and like I said, the list of other guys who profiled similarly in pressure response, not the most encouraging. But hey, this is one metric, pressure response, right? And Jayden Daniels, he was barely even pressured in college. He clearly was fine on every other down. Drake May and Caleb Williams, for example, took about 150 pressured dropbacks on their seasons. JD, that number was only about 100. So this is a small sample size too. It's much smaller than most other quarterbacks. Worth being concerned about, but it's not going to tell the whole story. What about his middle of the field tendencies? What about his three-pointer? How does that look? Well, as outlined by the guy who initially proposed this three-point comparison, Jayden Daniels threw over the middle of the football field at a 9.3% rate in college. For context, for comparison, The only other two quarterbacks since 2019 to be taken in the first round with lower or similar middle of field throw tendencies were Zach Wilson and Justin Fields. Okay, I'm a little bit more worried, maybe. I mean, Zach Wilson, he's not the dual threat that Jayden Daniels is, but Justin Fields, similar pressure response and similar middle field throwing tendencies. Should we be worried about that? Well, maybe not yet, because Jayden Daniels, his deep ball accuracy is way better. He's much more of an explosive player. I mean, he won the Heisman. He's much better down the field. It seems like his arm is better than somebody like Justin Fields, and it feels like he's faster than someone like Jalen Hurts, who has similar tendencies at the pro level. I don't know about college. But get this. On the season, of all of the passing yards that Jayden Daniels accounted for, 49% of them were on two routes, hitches and goes. That sounds to me like a Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors stat. Should we be concerned about that? Is deep ball accuracy, is it his or is it theirs? I don't know. We don't know. But it is worth being a little worried. That is what everybody said. Or sorry, that is what a lot of people said. A lot of people, including myself. Now, did I think Jayden Daniels was going to be a bust? No, but I thought that maybe he would be a later first-round prospect. I thought that he might be a bit riskier. He might have a lower floor. I said around draft season that he is clearly a high-ceiling player in a number of ways. We know that there's a lot of things he can do well, but high-ceiling teams don't usually pick early in the draft. The teams that already have a pretty stable environment. The teams that say, drop Jalen Hurts in and have fantastic results almost immediately. That's kind of what I was hoping Jayden Daniels would end up with. As a Patriots fan, boom, there's my ideology revealed to you. I didn't want us to take him because I was worried our offensive line would not do right by him. And I was worried that our receivers would negate any potential deep ball ability that he may truly have. So I said to myself, let's hope he doesn't end up in a bottom two offensive line situation, right? Let's hope he can find a respected offensive coordinator with a promising history, right? Let's hope he doesn't end up on a team like, say, the Washington Commanders, right? Wrong. Really wrong. Really, really wrong. Obviously, I and a number of others missed. We did not get these projections right. We did not read the tea leaves correctly. But this is where we talk about Jayden Daniels, the player. Because, like I said, the archetype put him in one group. It put him in one drawer, one cabinet, what have you. But he himself, the player, the person, broke these molds. He showed us that he is something the league has, and I mean this genuinely, never seen before. This is where we need to talk about Jayden Daniels, the player. Now, before I start on Jayden Daniels, the player, I want to talk about 4 other players. Not for too long. I'm going to group them all together. This will be fast. Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jayden Daniels. So 3 players. I lied. Take a look at all of these quarterbacks and tell me what they have in common. Maybe you think like me, maybe you don't, but to me the answer is obvious. 2 things. 1, they all played in the conference championship this year, and 2, they are all true dual threat quarterbacks. By my count, and maybe you think that Joe Burrow and Brock Purdy are dual threat quarterbacks, in which case I would refer you back to 2022. By my count, this current NFL season, the 2024-2025 NFL season, was the first time in NFL history that we saw 4 dual threat quarterbacks in the conference championship games. The final 4 quarterbacks standing were all dual threats. That's interesting. Why is that? Well, other things that these quarterbacks and their teams had in common. They were all top 10 in rushing attempts. These were really run-heavy offenses, and their quarterbacks contributed to that run-heaviness. On any number of drop-back passes in a game, these guys could take off and run themselves and gash a defense that way. It is what they do. It is what dual-threat quarterbacks do. On top of that, these quarterbacks were all a part of great offenses on 4th down. Funny enough, the top 4 offenses in football this season on 4th down were the 4 conference championship teams. I don't think that's a coincidence, and I don't think it's a coincidence that all of these quarterbacks play relatively similar styles of football. Another thing that all of these teams have in common, well, in their playoff victories this season, and this applies to every team that was winning playoff games with the exception of the Texans when they played the Chiefs and the Chiefs when they played the Bills. In every other game in the playoffs, the team that won the turnover battle won the game. Texans doesn't count because they broke even with the Chiefs, and the Chiefs-Bills game doesn't count because the Chiefs won. But in every single other game this postseason, the team that committed fewer turnovers won the game. Additionally, oftentimes, these quarterbacks on these teams that committed fewer turnovers who won the games, well, the quarterbacks themselves would end with not too many passing yards. These would be ball control wins. These would be run-heavy wins. These would be high-floor wins. What is the baseline for your offense? How bad can things get, and how not bad is that? The Eagles, the Bills, the Chiefs, all of these teams winning these games were playing really high floor football. Zooming out for a second, the general trend in the NFL over recent years has been that there are fewer possessions in a football game. We are at the lowest mark we have pretty much ever seen in the possession tracking era in terms of possessions per game. What that means is that the average possession is longer, which means that there are fewer of them in a game, which means that if you commit a turnover on one of these, you're really hurting your team. Again, this is why these dual-threat quarterbacks on these run-heavy, fourth-down excelling offenses were winning playoff games. It sounds like I'm rambling, but I'm really trying to underline here that this is what high-floor quarterbacking looks like, being a dual-threat quarterback. Meanwhile, you take a look at all of the young pocket passers who played in the playoffs this season. Well, Justin Herbert and Jordan Love combined for 7 interceptions, and CJ Stroud took 9 sacks versus Kansas City. You really mean to tell me that a quarterback who can take off and run more often than those guys would have committed that many turnovers in those games? I'm not saying they would have won them, but I'm telling you, it would have been higher floor offense. All of that being said, why does this matter? Well, as it pertains to Jayden Daniels, when I was talking about his projection come draft season, I referred to him as high ceiling, but low floor. The sacks, the middle field avoidance, all of that. I said that these were worrying things that, when you look at a guy like Justin Fields, could lead to catastrophe, could be low floor quarterbacking. Because that's what we've been taught. We've been taught that these quarterbacks who don't play the game in a traditional way are the ones who are riskier. It was not that long ago that we were told that Mac Jones is a high floor quarterback. He's somebody who assures a relative level of stability in your offense that you can't get from everybody. He is pro-ready. He is able to play in any offense. He will work the middle of the field. He will not get crazy ideas in his head and try to extend plays. These are all things we were told lead to safe quarterbacking, lead to sound quarterbacking. My point being, not anymore though. Nowadays, high-floor quarterbacks are the ones who are physically talented enough to create out of structure, create additional plays, and avoid negatives, yet at the same time, easily create within structure as well. The guys who prefer to play within the rhythm of their offense, who prefer to bond and mind meld with their offensive coordinators, with their play callers, but the guys who can do other things. And on top of the floors being higher for these guys, their ceilings are about as high as we've ever seen in football. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, who is playing the sport like them? The thing about all of these guys, though, is that none of them were good off rip in the NFL. Most of them didn't even play their rookie seasons. Pat Mahomes, he sat. Josh Allen, he was bad his rookie year. Lamar Jackson barely played his rookie season. Jalen Hurts barely played his rookie season. Like I said, they've got more on their plate. They've got to create out of structure as well as within structure. Enter Jayden Daniels. Time to talk about Jayden Daniels. Finally. Jayden Daniels took the NFL by storm, and he really didn't wait around. He became the first quarterback of this high-floor archetype to ever do it immediately. Do it off rip. Do it from the jump. Do it at the pro level. Editor Anthony here. That was a shameless lie. What I really was trying to say is the first quarterback recently to have done it off rip. If you go back about 10 years, you've got guys like Robert Griffin III, Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, Dak Prescott even. All of those guys were good pretty much off rip in the NFL, playing as dual threat quarterbacks. But in recent years, I'm very by the belief that, defense continues to improve and we continue to make things harder and harder on young quarterbacks. These quarterbacks are often younger and younger than they've been in the past too. In my mind, all of this combines to make the playing field really hard for these guys, for these dual threat guys. And that's, again, why I'm saying the expectation for someone like me was low, that it will take time, that sort of thing. But again, like I said, Jayden Daniels did it off rip. He did it at the pro level. He was doing things that he did in college, again, at the pro level. And what's funny about that, what's funny about him doing it at the pro level, is that early in the 2024 Commanders season, their offense, for lack of a better word, felt, collegiate. Now, I had a friend, a Commanders fan, who yelled at me earlier this year for calling their offense collegiate. He took it as an insult, and I understand why you would take that as an insult. So don't take it from me in this context. Take it from Cam Taylor-Britt, the guy who said it before week 4 when the Commanders played the Bengals. Was it week 4? It might have been week 3. Now, Taylor-Britt called the Commanders offense collegiate for some very valid reasons. And let me be clear what I mean here when I say those reasons were valid. Remember how we wondered, or at least how I wondered, whether or not Jayden Daniels' abilities and tendencies would translate to the NFL, to the pro level, whether he could curve his game, so to speak, whether it would morph, and whether it would change the way almost every quarterback has to change. Well, when I say the Washington offense felt collegiate early, it's because schematically it was not. It was very complex, it was very well designed, but it felt quite similar to college Jayden Daniels. The tendencies were very similar to college Jayden Daniels. See, through the first 2 weeks of the season, when under pressure, Jayden Daniels looked like the exact same guy. And that's because, like I said, pressure response stats, they're pretty psychological. He had the second highest scramble rate when under pressure in football. He had the lowest throw percentage when pressured in football. And he had the second highest sack percentage when pressured in football. Jayden Daniels looked like his regular old self, but he didn't have Brian Thomas Jr. He didn't have Malik Neighbors. One would think then that the Commanders were struggling, but they were not. And that's because on top of Jayden Daniels and his tendencies remaining collegiate, the Commanders' offense and their tendencies were overall kind of collegiate. Through the first 4 weeks of the NFL season, the Commanders were first in screen percentage in the NFL. They were second in passes behind the line of scrimmage. Jayden Daniels had the second most total under pressure scrambles of any quarterback in football. And through 4 weeks, the Commanders' offense set a record. Jayden Daniels set this record, to be clear, for highest completion percentage by a quarterback through 4 weeks of a season ever. Like I said, a lot of checkdowns, a lot of screens, a lot of scrambles. These are things we generally associate with college. When you're doing these things this often, you must just be better than the other team. In the NFL, generally talent is more even, and so you can't be predictable. The Commanders were kind of predictable, though, at least when you really zoomed out. Now, perhaps my favorite stat here, the final one that's really necessary to contextualize this Commanders offense, because to this point, it sounds like I'm calling Jayden Daniels and Cliff early in the year checkdown merchants, is that on throws downfield, as pointed out by Austin Gale of The Ringer, Jayden Daniels had the best completion percentage of any rookie since 2006. So they were going downfield, they were completing passes downfield, they were doing all of the short stuff as well, and the thing about their downfield throws is that nothing was forced. They were good at everything. The Commanders had the 9th highest success rate through 4 weeks of any offense in football since 2016. Tendency-wise, they were collegiate, they were predictable, relatively. They were playing a safe brand of football, relatively, but it was working in a way that it should not. Take Cam Taylor-Britt's Bengals, for example. They got fried by this. Now, why did they get fried by a college offense? Again, college in quotes. Well, like I hinted at already, college football sees a much wider talent differential than the NFL. The athletes are not the same. There are some NFL-level players on the same field as guys who are just going to go work a job in real estate once their playing career is done. Tendencies are simpler at the college level because when you have good enough athletes, you don't really need to do much else. Now, the Commanders' offense as a whole, they didn't have the best athletes in the world, even though some of those guys were good, but they did have Jayden Daniels. And Jayden Daniels, through 4 weeks, proved that he was the caliber of athlete that allows you to play with the same college tendencies at the pro level. I'll put it this way, because I really like putting it this way. When you think of dual threat quarterbacks in football, think of them in 2 ways. The power rushers, like Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson, maybe Josh Allen, although Josh Allen is pretty fast in the open field, Cam Newton. Think of those guys and put them in one bucket, and put the true speed guys in another. I think a third category could be the improvisers like Patrick Mahomes. We'll ignore him for this. Slow guys and fast guys. Of the fast guys in recent NFL history, we've got guys like Justin Fields and Kyler Murray. Those are 2 of the immediate ones to come to mind. How often have we seen a fast dual-threat quarterback in a spread offense off-rip in the NFL? Well, Lamar Jackson, another fast quarterback, he played with Greg Roman for multiple years to start his career. That was not a spread offense. Now he's in a spread offense. He's about to win his 3rd MVP. Wrong. Justin Fields, that was not really a spread offense. It was also an incredibly poorly designed offense. Things went very poorly for him. I would not really count that either. Kyler Murray, when he played for Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona, absolutely played in a spread offense off-rip. And he was pretty good when paired with Cliff Kingsbury, except for the fact that eventually this Cardinals offense got very predictable. Now, all due respect to Kyler Murray, but my point here is that spread offenses that work the field horizontally, that take advantage of really fast quarterbacks, we see them a lot at the college level when the athletic differential is higher, but at the NFL level, with Jayden Daniels here in Washington this season, this was the first time really ever that we were seeing a quarterback work with this off-rip who was not 5'10" and would not completely avoid the middle of the field. This was slightly different. Again, no diss to Kyler. Those offenses with Cliff and him in Arizona were pretty good, but this was clearly a different beast in Washington, and that was evident from the jump. Some more college tendencies, some more college stats. Through 4 weeks, Jayden Daniels had far and away the most scrambles of any quarterback in football. It really wasn't close. On top of scrambling a lot, Daniels averaged 7.3 yards per scramble, so he was really damaging with them. On top of that, on short throws, like I said, spread, horizontal stretch, the Commanders were 7th in yards on targets between 0 and 9 yards, and on average, they earned an additional 3.3 yards after the catch on these throws. Again, like I said, this offense had the 9th highest success rate of any offense since 2016. They broke completion percentage records, and all of this was because in the early season, the Commanders' offense was playing with multiple checkdowns on every play. Sure, they could throw down the field, but they were playing efficient football by playing high-floor football, by eliminating negatives, by always hunting the easy answers. Jayden Daniels, on almost every play, would either throw a screen, throw something short, take off and run himself, or if the situation finally called for it, make a play downfield. He could do those too, and he would do them enough that a defense would have to back off and allow him to take the stuff underneath again. It was incredible to watch early. We had never seen anything like this from a rookie quarterback this early. I said it just now, I'll say it again. There were truly no negatives in this approach. There were no bad plays. Now, Cliff did a lot here. Anthony Lynn did a lot here. The run game was really great too here, but most of it was Jayden Daniels and the special athlete that he was, but also the special quarterback that he was, the processor. Jayden Daniels looked really decisive early in the season. He knew what his answers were, and he would get to them faster than most other rookie quarterbacks could. That was the final needle-moving element here. This is why something like this did not work for Kyler Murray immediately, or for Justin Fields by the time he briefly played in a bit of a spread offense. No, Jayden Daniels looked more polished. Why? Well, it was around this time that a fascinating piece from Ben Standig of The Athletic dropped. It was October, I believe. Standig wrote about how Jayden Daniels, at the college level and now in the NFL, had been improving his game through the use of virtual reality technology. We all felt like Jayden Daniels looked like he was processing the game at a faster speed than most, as if the game moved in slow motion for him, but we didn't know there was a reason for this. Not until this piece that likened Jayden Daniels and his preparation at the NFL level to a sort of flight simulator for quarterbacks. As outlined by Standig, apparently Jayden Daniels started working with VR technology in his final year at LSU. And now, at the NFL level, Cliff Kingsbury, Jayden Daniels' offensive coordinator, spent about 60 minutes a week working on importing both play call audio and actual plays into this program that also featured realistic stadiums with realistic play clocks. In the piece, Daniels spoke to this technology and really praised it. He said, once you get in there, everything slows down. Once you play in the actual games, you can say, oh, I knew this was coming. The most important part about this technology is also something that was outlined by Standig. Apparently, when JD uses said technology, he could speed things up. He could put things on 1.5 times speed, the same way that you, perhaps watching this video, are watching it at a sped up pace. Daniels could objectively improve his processing and scanning abilities with this headset so that by the time he went out on the field on Sundays, he was ready. He was more prepared than most rookie quarterbacks. When this piece came out, it really started to click for me that we were working with something different with Daniels here. That all of the prior prognostications we made about quarterbacks from this archetype, they were not relevant to JD, who he was as a player, and what he was working with in terms of development at the pro level. And if you think I'm reaching, if you think I'm projecting, if you think I'm giving this technology too much credit, take it from JD, not from me. Jayden Daniels said that from a scanning perspective, this technology has helped him improve 70 to 80%. Think about that. Think about how impactful that is for a quarterback. Remember earlier how I said that pressure to sack rate is a metric that generally does not change too much from the college level to the NFL? Well, if you look at Jayden Daniels' college history, his pressure to sack rate was still worrying by his final year, but if you looked at his previous years of quarterbacking, it was way worse. It dropped a lot by the time he was a senior at LSU. Coincidence that this is when he started with the VR technology? I don't think so. Like I said, I don't really believe in coincidences, but we can leave that up to question. So yeah, that piece, it was a fascinating early season release. To me and to a lot of others, we said, wow, that explains a lot about Jayden Daniels. Washington is really doing this. But they are playing some pretty easy defenses, and we know that the NFL is a do-it-again league. The competition's about to improve. Is Washington going to be able to keep doing these things again? Keep relying on these tendencies? Keep playing this brand of football? Let's find out. Now, as the season went on for Washington, the competition did increase, and their offensive output did decrease. Things became a little bit harder. Jayden Daniels had a rib injury. Wins were still coming easy at first, like, say, in the Panthers game when Daniels left, and Marcus Mariota got busy with this offense. It was very clear that the run game designs were great, and that Cliff Kingsbury's play calling and the offense's overall tendencies were a little bit bigger than Daniels, and other quarterbacks could pilot it too. But again, against lesser competition, it was hard to understand anything big picture about this team. Would they be a serious playoff team by the end of the season? What would they look like against some of the top defenses in football? The Bears game, for at least the first 3 quarters, 14 minutes, and 59 seconds, felt like it may be marking a turning point in Washington's season. It felt like maybe the competition was finally catching up to them. Finally, Jayden Daniels was going to lose to a worthy opponent. That opponent being Caleb Williams only made things even more interesting. It felt like finally we were going to see what Washington looked like once the Do It Again League caught on to their initial againings, caught on to the things that they were relying on early in the season. That is until the Hail Mary was completed. And then it became apparent that Washington may have been declining in terms of overall offensive success rate, but they swapped that success rate for clutch game-winning drives, and the wins stayed regardless. Throughout the middle of Washington's season, they found themselves in a number of close games against opponents of all different strengths, of all different calibers. They kept winning these games time after time, no matter how banged up JD may look or how banged up the roster may look. They kept finding answers, and they kept delivering in the most important moments of the game late. And the thing about winning close games late, one of my favorite things about clutch quarterbacks and clutch teams in football in general, is that once you do it once you know what it feels like, you have a lot more confidence to do it again. And you gain the ability of recall. You know what it feels like to do it once, so you know how it should feel to do it again. The Commanders keep winning. Jayden Daniels, as the easy stuff decreases, increases his high-level throws, increases his downfield output. And even though Jayden Daniels' downfield output starts to increase as the season goes on, his turnover rate remains quite low. It continues to look like the highest floor rookie quarterback season we have ever seen. And by the time the season ends, Washington has 12 wins. It's one of the best seasons in the history of the franchise. If we're only talking about regular season, it is possibly the most hope-inspiring season ever for the team, even though this is a team that has won Super Bowls. This year felt different. It felt like a change. It felt like a revolution. By the end of the year, Washington is 4th in terms of EPA per play on offense. They are 5th in success rate. Jayden Daniels' 75 scrambles are the most of any quarterback in a season since at least 2002, the most of any rookie quarterback in a season ever. The next closest quarterback on the 2024 season had 50. The Commanders' run rate was 50%, the 5th highest in football. Their run or play action rate was 65%, the 4th highest. Again, referring you to this possessions chart, in the NFL these days, ball control seems to be the formula to winning games, and the Commanders played the exact style of football that one thinks of when they think ball control. Perhaps the best stat of all was Washington's 87% conversion rate on 4th down. No team ever can compare to that, at least not with this sample size. Remember when everybody was crying about the tush push in the Philadelphia Eagles in 2023? Well, this year for Washington was better than that. And they had no tush push. They just had JD. This team looked legit. This team looked like they had everything that you look for, in spite of the poor defense, in spite of the questions about offensive line depth and receiver depth. This was a team that looked like it was capable of winning on any given week. But the playoffs are about whether you actually do or not. Could they hold up in the playoffs? Well, evidently, they could. They start by taking down the champions of the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. On the game, on 4th down, the Commanders actually drop in terms of conversion success rate from the regular season, something we worried may affect their playoff success. But in this game, all of these conversions were in the red zone because Washington's offense was too relentless to be stopped before the red zone. On the day, while Washington is stopped a couple of times in these situations, the times that they convert lead to touchdowns, and the overall point total of these touchdowns, when compared to if Washington had just settled for field goals, it amounted to a net gain for the Commanders of about 2 or 3 points, and that's the margin that they win by. Jayden Daniels completes his 3rd game of the season in which the Commanders do not punt or turn the football over once. No other rookie quarterback ever has any. That's not a coincidence. And then Washington moves on to the 1 seed, the Detroit Lions in Detroit. And they handle business once again. The story of this game, outside of simply Jayden Daniels doing it again on offense, well, turnovers. Remember how I talked about high-floor quarterbacking, dual-threat quarterbacking, and how the young pocket passers in the playoffs this season, guys like Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, how they kind of struggled? Well, Jared Goff is a pocket passer that I did not even mention. Jared Goff's 2 interceptions and a fumble are ultimately the reasons that Detroit loses this game. They can't stop Jayden Daniels, and they can't keep up offensively to the Commanders. Washington is just too mean, too relentless on 4th down. These 4th downs that they're converting, they're not even analytics-based decisions anymore. They're just trust in Jayden Daniels. The computer marks these as toss-ups. Dan Quinn doesn't care. And Jayden Daniels? Well, through 2 playoff games, 2 playoff wins, JD has more playoff wins than he has negative plays. That means interceptions, fumbles, turnovers, sacks. This is now definitively the greatest rookie quarterback season we have ever seen, and perhaps one of the highest floor seasons for a quarterback that we have ever seen. In terms of rookie quarterbacks drafted, where Jayden Daniels was drafted or higher, no one has ever done this. This is genuinely unprecedented. Ultimately, Daniels and the Commanders fall to the Eagles, the best defense in football. If we're being real, not only was this defense the best in football, but the Eagles are simply the better team all around in this game. Their offense is better, their special teams are better. But if we're being really real, well, Daniels also played about as well as he could have in this game. He didn't really do anything wrong. He wasn't really at fault for this Commanders loss. It's rare to see a final score this lopsided, in which the quarterback of the losing team takes truly close to 0% of the blame, but realistically, Daniels, again, had almost no negative plays. In the second quarter, Jayden Daniels completes a touchdown pass to Terry McLaurin to make the game 12-14. He fails on the 2-point conversion attempt. The Commanders kick back to the Eagles, and the next time Daniels touches the ball, his team is down 27-12. At the end of the third quarter, down 11 and driving with the football after a defensive stop on the Eagles at long last, Jayden Daniels completes a pass to Austin Eckler around midfield. Eckler fumbles the football, and the next time Daniels touches that football, the score is 23-14 with 15 minutes to go. Washington fumbled 3 times in this game. Their defense allowed a record number of rushing touchdowns and close to a record number of total touchdowns. This Commanders team just wasn't ready yet. Not ready for this level of competition. But their quarterback was. As highlighted by his numbers, by his efficiency, by the wins, by the 14 fourth down attempts that we saw from the Commanders in this playoff run of theirs, somehow, some way, their rookie quarterback was ready, all ready, for the biggest games on the biggest stages of the biggest sports league in America, behind what was projected to be one of the worst offensive lines in football, working with one of the worst receiving corps in football, working with one of the most undermanned defenses in football, and with one of the most slept on and doubted coaching staffs in the sport, the Commanders completed a truly miraculous season. It may have ended on a sad note on that day in Philly, but overall, the feelings from the year were triumphant. Now, I said every quarterback enters the league as a question, and they ultimately generate a lesson. And like I said, we only really just wrapped up JD 101. But that doesn't mean we haven't learned anything. 101 classes can still teach you a lot. Let's talk about the lessons here. Let's talk about what we have learned from Jayden Daniels in 2024 and from the Washington Commanders in 2024. This is the conclusion here, if it was not clear. Now, I want to start with the obvious. For me, one of the big things that I have learned is don't profile quarterbacks. Don't only profile quarterbacks. Do not assume that every quarterback fits into the exact same bucket as other guys who have come before him. And if you do choose to profile quarterbacks, because, at the end of the day, we are all humans. We like comparisons. We like point of reference. Focus on the positives. Imagine what is necessary to build around these guys. Look at, say, Jalen Hurts and focus on what worked for him as an outside of the numbers, down the field, scramble heavy quarterback. And don't just look at the Justin Fieldses of the world and what went wrong. There's a Kevin O'Connell quote from earlier this season, one that is related to Sam Darnold that I think is really pertinent to this discussion. And that is that Kevin O'Connell, a former quarterback himself, is by the belief that organizations fail young quarterbacks far more often than young quarterbacks fail organizations. If you see failure of a young guy in the NFL at the quarterback position, don't be so quick to assume it was his fault and that other guys with similar traits will be at fault when they enter the league. Do not think that way. Think about the team. Think about what they did wrong, and think about what other teams could and should do right. On a similar note, when it comes to focusing on positives, earlier I talked about how it was hard to tell if Jayden Daniels and the things that he was averse to at the college level were a result of him simply not being able to do those things or simply choosing not to do those things. That relates to negatives versus positives in general. Negatives in relation to quarterback scouting are often dealing with unknowns. He doesn't do this and I don't know why. He doesn't make this decision and I don't understand the process. He doesn't do this thing that I want him to do. And I'm not sure how to make him do it. I'm not sure if he will do it. I'm not sure what his thoughts are about it. Positives, though, normally are tangible things that you see, that show up on tape, that happen over and over and over again, things you know for sure. When you dumb it down, focusing on the things that you don't understand or don't see and wondering why is simply less rational than focusing on what you do see, what you do understand, what you do appreciate, and comprehending why those things work for that player. I think that's a lesson for me more than anyone, but positives, plain and simple, in any discussion, in any walk of life, tangible positives as opposed to intangible, potentially non-existent negatives, are always more worthwhile, are always going to be more relevant. Lesson number 2, for me, character matters. Jayden Daniels, the person. It's true. I think so often you see draft analysts, you see film nerds, you see people who only watch the games on Sundays and see nothing else, dumb a player down to their on-field production. They do not focus on what's going on behind the scenes, and they do not really care more often than not. In the 2024 draft cycle, I looked at far too many numbers, and I did not look at enough Jayden Daniels interviews. I didn't look enough at Jayden Daniels, the person, and the journey that he's been on, and how he made the Commanders organization feel from the day that he showed up in their building. All of these things are important. And in relation to character mattering, belief matters. I mean, you look at Daniels and you look at the roster that he was working with, that Washington was working with. You look at the island of misfit toys. You look at the old veterans who are clearly past their prime. You look at the offensive line that nobody believed in. You mean to tell me that belief did not elevate this unit? You mean to tell me that the feedback loop of belief, success, more belief, and more success did not contribute to this magical Washington season? You mean to tell me that the reason that guys like Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner are most likely going to stick around for this team does not have to do with Jayden Daniels? I mean, as we speak, Myles Garrett may be joining this team in the future, because he believes in this quarterback, because everybody on this team believes in what they're capable of. I have also learned, in general, as I already kind of alluded to, that you never know what's going on behind the scenes with quarterbacks. I think the VR story is probably the best example of that. It's fascinating, and there's no way that I would have known that during the draft cycle. Sometimes you have to sit and wait for information. And while on that subject, it's often hard to know the quality of the help, of the additional pieces surrounding a quarterback, a guy like Jayden Daniels, who's handing him these headsets, who's taking the time out of their week to program in audio and plays for their quarterback, who is designing the run game in Washington, who is overseeing the organization in Washington. Which leads me to some lessons about football, about franchises, about team building, lessons bigger than Jayden Daniels, lessons that Washington taught me this year. And I think the biggest and most obvious lesson here is to not overlook the impact of a bad owner. Dan Snyder, nobody likes you. Look at what happened as soon as you left. It's amazing. Ownership groups, I think, are really cool, and that's just something I'm going to be toying with in general in football when I think about, what goes into a successful organization. Not having a billionaire who is also a terrible person in charge of the fate of your team. That's a good place to start, it seems. Next up, on a bit more of a serious note here, something genuine and something about football, don't write off men who love the game, who have experience. That can go for players like Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz, but that can also go for guys like Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury, two people who, in their last NFL stops, kind of failed, kind of came up short. Dan Quinn's game plan against the Green Bay Packers was bad. It was objectively not good. Cliff Kingsbury at the end in Arizona with Kyler Murray, that was not good. That was hard to watch. But these guys love the game. They want to be around the game. They want to be around players. They want to do right by fans. They want to get better at what they love. Those people should not be overlooked, and I think far too often we are probably harsher on coaches than we need to be. Unless a coach really gives you character concerns as a person, I think that's irrational. Next up, and semi-related, something I also just alluded to, do not overlook position coaches. The offensive line in Washington, the run game in Washington, again, shout out Anthony Lynn. These people behind the scenes are some of the most impactful an organization can have. It was Dan Campbell who said that he is by the belief the most important decision a coach can make is who he hires for his staff. I'm a Patriots fan. Our staff sucked. We said goodbye to our head coach, and I couldn't really complain about it because I agree with Dan Campbell. The decisions that Dan Quinn made, the guys that he brought into this building, the people who he trusted in to help him with this rebuild, to help right this ship, those people are just as important as Quinn was to this. I'm sure Quinn would tell you he could not have done it without them. You look at some of the best teams in football this year. You look at the Eagles making multiple Super Bowls with multiple different head coaches, multiple different quarterbacks, but one offensive line coach. It's really important to acknowledge. And finally, more broadly, just a lesson about team building and about football organizations overall. Embrace the sport. Embrace its parity, embrace its complexity, and embrace its unpredictability. The NFL is a small sample size sport. It's about the smallest out there in terms of game length, in terms of season length, in terms of the impact that one player can make on one play. There is just so much, but also so little. The variance of this sport, the magical plays, the bad breaks, all of it should be appreciated and should be hoped for. It should be actively accounted for. When people like myself are trying to guess how many wins a rebuilding team is going to have, or how long a rebuild is going to take, these things can always happen in unexpected ways. Now, how does this all apply looking forward? I started this video by saying that I love hindsight. I think hindsight is a gift. I love learning from the past and then, most importantly, applying that past to the future. I've clearly learned a lot from Washington and from Jayden Daniels this season, and maybe you have too, but I think one of the biggest lessons in all of this when we're talking about application and what we've learned that's going to matter looking forward is something as simple as this. To some degree, football is entirely unpredictable until the games are in action. There's this self-help quote, self-wellness quote that I actually really love that I think is really relevant to this, and it is this. It is the following. Every action you take is a vote cast for the person you want to become. Washington was not this figurative person before their season started. No matter how much Jayden Daniels was this person before his season started, his legacy and the person that we now view him as, the person that we now view this team to be, figuratively, all of it was created through action as well, through the plays that Jayden Daniels made, through the wins that he earned, and through the belief that he instilled. For me, this has been a lesson in projection versus process, in definitive reason versus random chance. The truth is, legacies are never just one or the other. They are never entirely predictable. They are never entirely lucky and unpredictable. You need both to create a legacy. You need all sorts of help, but you also need to help yourself. For that reason, you are ultimately never going to know what happens until it happens. So why not believe? Why not take the most optimistic path? Why not have hope, have faith, whatever term you choose? It always seems to be worthwhile, and that's probably the biggest thing I've learned overall. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. It definitely went a bit longer than I expected it to, but that's because I had a lot to say, I guess. You can find me on TikTok and on YouTube. I'll flash those on the screen as well. And I hope to have weekly YouTube videos up for the remainder of this football season and also the off season, which is pretty much the only thing coming up. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you like and subscribe, and come back next time. Let's keep talking.